I call it leading from the heart. It's not from the head. It's not about you. It's never about you. You want to make an impact in people's lives. I start to tell people, you got to learn how to love people. I talk about my walk and I talk about the importance of loving people and caring about people. And you take a risk to be that kind of leader, because not everybody gets it. Their work ethics, their worldview is always different, and you got to find a way to get around those things to speak to their heart. We had most all of our groups, our teams, our tactical groups working on this huge operation, and it was successful. All the good guys went home, all the bad guys went to jail. How are they able to accomplish this? And the response from one of the guys that I knew real well said, they care about each other. He goes, what do you mean? He goes, I'm telling you right now, these guys care about each other. Their teams care about each other. They care about their bosses. The bosses care about them. And you can't stop them. Their pursuit is for excellence. They don't want to stop.
Welcome to another exciting episode of the podcast, The Thought Leader Revolution. I'm your host, Nikki Ballou. And boy, do we have an exciting guest lined up for you today. Today's guest is a true thought leader when it comes to building high-performance, well-functioning teams. He began his career in the world of service. In fact, law enforcement service. He eventually ended up joining the Drug Enforcement Administration and rose through the ranks to one of the highest positions in that organization. He is a man of faith. He is a man who really wants to make a difference in the world. He's a warrior of love. I am speaking, of course, of none other than the one, the only, the legendary Jimmy Capra. Welcome to the show, Jimmy.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate being here. I really do. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. So, Jimmy, let me tell you a little bit about who listens to the show and why they listen to the show. So the people who listen to this show are all entrepreneurs. They're all people who want to make a difference for themselves, their families, their clients, the world. They're men and women who really believe in freedom, in free expression, and free enterprise. And they listen to the show because they're looking for some inspiration. They're looking for some hope. They're looking for some steps, tips, tricks, and strategies that they can use to make their business and their life better. They want to open themselves up to you because they hear from me every week. But before they can open themselves up to you, they got to get to know you, man. So tell us your backstory. How'd you get to be the great Jimmy Capra?
I don't know about the great. I don't think I've been introduced like that, but that's pretty cool, man. Well, you know what? I come from a family of service. We're I call it kind of a legacy family in terms of service, both in the military and law enforcement. And I was one of those kids who barely got out of high school. I mean, my dad was a Korean War vet, came home, married my mom, and joined the New York City Police Department. Got hurt on the job, broke his back and neck, and moved us up to upstate New York, where most of my upbringing was. So I in my teenage years, I really was looking for a purpose. And for young men and women, sometimes that's a difficult challenge. Say, okay, Lord, what am I supposed to be doing? And I sat one evening with my father and decided I was going to go into service. Fell in love with service. I joined the Navy. Was a hospital corpsman, a medic. Got out. I during my last year in the service, I really felt like praying about it. Said I really want to go into law enforcement. Found this outfit called the Drug Enforcement Administration. Went to college. I always tell people this is not the way to do things, but I went to college. I met my wife, who was the first day of college. Started dating her 2 weeks later, and asked her to marry me like 3 months later. So that was now 42 years ago, and we have now 6 kids. 5 out of my 6 are married. 7 grandkids, or the 7th one is on the way. But I was fortunate enough to graduate, get picked up by DEA. By then, I had moved from the Navy, Navy Reserves, Air National Guard, and then I was a military intelligence officer for the Army Reserves. And when I got done with my training, I got picked up by DEA, and boom, my career took off for 28 years.
That's amazing. So tell me a little bit about your career in the DEA. Exactly, what happened after you went into the DEA? How did your philosophy on team building and creating high performance teams evolve through that experience?
Yeah. My dad had a 10th grade education. And he's probably, I tell people this all the time, had a couple of heroes in my life. My dad was one of them. My oldest brother was another one. But when I got ready to join law enforcement, my father said to me, he said, "You want to be a hero?" Because in my mind, I was like, I want to be, before Captain America was popular, Captain America was one of my favorite comic book heroes. And I said, that's the kind of guy I want to be. That's it. I want to be like Captain America. And my dad, never forget, he said to me, he goes, you want to be a hero? And I, was just looking at him. He said, "You want to be a hero? Become a fireman." He goes, "Everybody loves a fireman." He said, "If you want people to despise you, go into law enforcement." And so, we talked a little bit further. He goes, "Look, you're going to love the job." He said, "You're going to love going into law enforcement." He didn't know the difference between an agent, a sheriff, a police officer. If you had a badge and a gun, you're a cop and you're one of the good guys. And he said, "It's not the bad guys that are going to give you a hard time." He said, "It's your own agency that's going to break your stones." It's literally what he said. And it didn't make sense to me at the time. I said, how could you be feel to be led to be called into a profession, but somehow your agency was breaking your stones? I really did. I immediately, within about a year, being on a job, went from Manhattan to Los Angeles, and I had an experience with a supervisor who we had made an arrest, arrested a bad guy, got some couple of kilos of coke off him. We seized a little vehicle that was a piece of junk. Anyway, I walked into his office one day, called me in, and he just ripped me from top to bottom.
Wow.
Questioned my academic acumen, questioned whether I should even be there. I had no idea what was going. None. I had less than 6 months on the job, and I caught what he said, which made a lasting impact. He said, "If I go down for this, I'm going to take you with me." Now I have no idea. I said, "We didn't steal money. We didn't kill anybody. What is he talking about?" Well, we had taken a vehicle, and I explained it a little bit more in my book. We had taken a vehicle from the bad guys, which I had said we should just have it towed. The senior guy on the set said, "Take it back to the division." And I took this vehicle back, and it just sat. It never got processed. So it got broken into. And now we had to write a little memo saying, here's what happened. And by the way, it wasn't a big deal. You write a memo, you do this, you got to write a memo so you're covered legally and everything else like that. Bad guy's in jail. But the boss, here's what struck me. I can hear my dad's words in my ears saying, "It's not the bad guys, it's your own agency." And I realized that this guy, no matter what happens, he's going to throw us under the bus. And in an agency like DEA, which is, you're dealing with some violent idiots out on the street. You're dealing with kind of the dredges of society, not just addicts, but really calculated thieves, murderers, really serious bad guys. And it's not so much of that, is how can I ever trust a boss, a supervisor, whose first indication of anything gone wrong, he's going to throw us under the bus? And so I had no trust in him whatsoever, none. And realized the rest of the crew, we had a relatively young crew, never trusted me. And so that stuck with me. And I started realizing, can't have that. You can't function. And the crew really never trusted this individual ever until he left and we got another boss. So that was my first, incident where I had what I would call a relatively bad boss. Not so much he was a mean-spirited guy, but he had no character. He had no substance. He had no care for the men and women that he wanted. I'd been in 3 different military services. I had some pretty good bosses, some men and women both, who were phenomenal men and women. But now here in my profession that I was pursuing, I was kind of set back, and I questioned whether or not I should be a part of this organization. I really did. I went, if this is the way this is like, how can you stay for, 10, 15, 20 years? But by the grace of God, we wind up getting a couple of bosses, and my idea of how to lead people, what it meant to lead men and women, started changing. And I started writing some things down and wrote some more down. And then I just started myself as you got senior, right? As you got senior, because everybody's junior, right? Everybody starts, I call it, at the mailroom. I started to, when I would hear somebody want to promote, I would start to talk to young men and women about the reality of promoting, about caring about men and women. So that's how it kind of took off. And later in my career, it kind of took a life of its own. So next thing you know, I'm being asked to travel around the country speaking to other divisions about leading, and I call it leading from the heart. It's not from the head. It's not about you. It's never about you. And
Love it.
so I started talking very, very candid to men and women across by the way, across the career fields. In other words, not just to agents, but to intel analysts, to professional clerical and people. Didn't matter. Is if you want to make an impact in people's lives, and that doesn't mean you have stars on your shoulders or stripes on it. You want to make an impact in people's lives. I'd start to tell people you got to learn how to love people. And man, you know, when you're in my profession, it's a tough profession. You're a narcotics officer. Yeah, they're scrap. We're scrappy. We're amazing men and women. It's a tough job. We have a macabre sense of humor because of the job that we're in. And now you've got a guy tell him, hey, listen, you want to make a difference in your walk. You want to make a difference in your organization. Learn how to care about and love people. And sometimes that set people back on their heels. But I kind of built on that, and I kept building on it and building on it. And I absolutely believe that. And I kind of put it to the test on the different places I've been. And I've been fortunate. We've probably moved about 14 times, my wife and I, since we've been married. About half of that was with DEA. And I was very, very blessed to have been promoted up through the ranks. And so one of the biggest impacts that you can tell in people's lives is not in our job. Our job is to take dope off the street, put bad people in jail. And that's part of our profession. You've got to be competent. You got to know your job. I've never met a leader in any profession who stunk in his profession. In other words, he wasn't a good employer or employee, rather. He didn't do. Most of the men and women that I've known who've been outstanding leaders were outstanding followers, and they were competent in their job, and they were competent in their character and their demonstrated behavior. So I just started building on that, and I would be asked as I moved up the ranks, hey, could you come and talk to my crew? Could you come and talk to my crew? And it started with 20 minutes talking to people. Those 20 minutes turned into an hour, turned into 2 hours, turned into 3 hours, and then all the way up and throughout the chain of command, all the way up till when I was the chief of global operations. I'd get asked from time to time, and other agencies would ask me to come and talk, because it wasn't agency specific. You know what I mean? It wasn't okay, this is specific to you, because it spoke to not only men and women, but it also spoke to civilian organizations, so out there. And so when I got ready to retire, my wife and I sat down, and I said, hey, she's the one who said, you always said you wanted to write a book. Why don't you try to write something by Christmas or something? So the day I retired, the official day I retired, I published our first book and started speaking. And now it's been 8 years and 6 books later, and spoken all over the United States and some places overseas. And it's been a blast. It's been a blast. But here's the deal, brother. This is the funny thing. I don't have, and I don't say this because it's not useful. I like many men and women. I have a library of books from men and women who I absolutely admire and respect, from from the international speakers to the local men and women around here. I don't have a magic set of beans. So in other words, if you follow these 3 steps, you'll be fantastic. I don't have good to great, which is a fantastic book. I don't have that. When I talk to people, I talk about my walk, and I talk about the importance of loving people and caring about people. And you take a risk to be that kind of leader, because not everybody gets it, and B, we're all dealing with people who come to us with, I call it, with baggage. Their work ethics, their worldview is always different, and you got to find a way to get around those things to speak to their heart, and that can be challenging. And if you're willing to do that, it's risky. It's risky because people disappoint you. But you want to know something? If you stay focused and keep going, it's worth it. When I look back in my career, I still get phone calls and emails from men and women who I've had the honor of serving with. We still talk about our times working together, or I'll talk later about when I retired and the notes that I got from people.
That's amazing. I took some good notes on what you said, but I really like what you just said at the end, because people disappoint you. It's very true. I mean, recently I've been disappointed by some people that I trusted.
Yeah.
The important thing for me, the lesson there, is to stay focused and keep going, and you'll be making a difference. And
Yeah.
that's really the important thing. I love what you said at the beginning, is in that it's leading from the heart. So back in December 2018, I came up with this phrase, which I call which is a heart leader. You
Yeah.
know, so it appears, Jimmy, you and I are kindred spirits in that regard, because our podcast is called the Thought Leader Revolution. Okay, and
Right.
what's a thought leader? Well, let me discuss being a thought leader with you right now. There's a couple of folks that I've really borrowed from when it comes to defining a thought leader. One of them's Matt Church. I've follow a lot of his work, and I incorporated it into my own. And he said that an expert is someone who knows something, right? Experts are a dime a dozen. There's a lot of people who know things. But a
That's right.
thought leader is someone who's known for knowing something. And you and
Yeah.
I kind of batted around that idea in a previous conversation we had a few days ago. And then David Meerman Scott, who I've had as a guest on my show, I met him because he spoke at one of Tony Robbins' events. He has an even more elegant description. He said, an expert's like a cover band, the thought leader plays original music, right? And I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. But then
Yeah.
I started to think about, well, what about a heart leader? What makes somebody who's a thought leader a heart leader? Well, it's simply they lead from their heart. You know,
Right.
they want to make a difference for people. They put caring at the center of their business. It's one of the things that I've been talking about and teaching myself, at least since December 2018, if not before, but since then in a very formal way, because I believe we're living in a time where people are sick of the me first generation. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They don't want to deal with, like, for example, a salesman who's just going to try to push you to buy because he needs a commission, right? They don't want to deal with a boss who's going to be like that first supervisor you had who said, if I'm going down, I'm taking you down with me, who doesn't really
Yeah.
care about doing the right thing or protecting his people, but, takes care of himself and his own career first and foremost, right? They're done with that crap. They've evolved.
Yeah.
They're more sophisticated than they've ever been. They want to know, first and foremost, that you give a good gosh darn about them, right? What was it Maya Angelou said?
Yeah.
People will forget what you said to them. People will forget what you did for them, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And
Yeah.
you come from making a difference for people. And
Yeah.
you rode that philosophy all the way to being chief of global operations for the premier, drug enforcement organization on the planet. So talk to
Right.
me. What is it about that had your superior Seagull, this Jimmy Capra fella? He's someone we should keep an eye on, and we should probably promote him. And what is it that had your people become loyal to you? Because you come from a warrior culture. It's not known for expressing love. Let's be honest.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because if you dig deep, I think some of the men and women that I've met in my career, and especially in the military, when we talk about loving your people, we sometimes say that without even thinking about it. Oh yeah, I love these guys. But this when I talk about learning how to fall in love with people, it's not this quiver in your liver. I said it's this conscious act of your will to say, I'm going to take care of this person the best I can. So that means what you have to do is, it's easy, brother, to like somebody who thinks like you. He has the same political ideas as you. Maybe it's the same faith, maybe the same, likes. It's a different thing to push all that to the side and look at the person that you work with every day and says, I don't care what their political view is. That person is a part of my team and I'm going to care about them. And so that's a hard thing for a lot of people, to do, to say, I'm going to push this off the side. And those are the things that I realized were more important than anything else. There are more people who aren't like me, who don't believe the way I believe in terms of maybe their personal life or personal faith. In that moment, I got to push that off to the side and say, yeah, this person is on my team, and I got to make sure what I do the best is to take care of them. I want them to grow. Here's the thing: professionally and personally. The people, what do you mean? We're talking about personally. Yeah. I want that individual, that team to grow professionally and personally. And I'm going to do what I can to make that happen. Now, so in terms of what this whole leading from the heart is, people say, well, you're talking about servant leadership. I said, yeah, it is. It is servant leadership. It goes back to being a servant first. But a lot of people think the servant leadership thing is a wussy thing. It's nice, it's touchy and feely. I still have to hold people accountable. I still have to bring people in and read them the riot act and say, man, you're not where you should be. I still had to have somebody come in who stepped on it and have to execute a certain discipline with them. And when we think about discipline, we think in terms of punishment and stuff. But I still had to talk to people and say, hey, I've had to, which is very difficult to do in the federal government, I've had to fire people. It's a hard thing to do. I tell people, the one thing that I really never want to do is have my conscience scarred so much in leadership positions that you lose your humility and you lose your compassion. And I would tell people about that. And the other thing I would tell them is, when I first started speaking to other groups, I would say, I'd walk in and I'd open up and say, I'm sort of a big deal. And they'd all look and laugh, and I go, and I would stop and I'd look real serious, take my glasses off and say, no, you don't understand. I'm the former chief of global operations, $800 million budget, this, that, and the other thing. And all of a sudden people start looking and go, oh, who is this knucklehead? And I would say, be careful of your ego. See, if your ego will take you to a place you never intended, and it'll corrupt you if you're not careful. And so that's all part of that heart thing. If you learn to lead from your heart, you put your ego off to the side. We all need a healthy ego. And if you really, if we're really concentrating on caring about and building people. Now I still have a mission. I got to take dope off the street. Got to put bad people in jail. We still that's still the tip of the spear. But how do you get there? People ask all the time, how do you get there? You get there by caring about people. Most of the men and women that we work with, and we always think, oh, half of my crew doesn't work. Most of the men and women that I've worked with are competent people. They know their job. There may be 10% of them that if they worked for the Antichrist, they would still work 100%. That's just the way it is sometimes. But the bulk of our men and women, I found out, are wonderful, talented men and women who like coming into work every day. So my job as a leader and as somebody who leads from the heart is not to make everybody happy and feel gushy and everything. Is to make them understand you have a purpose here. So I coined this thing called people, purpose, and passion. We deal with people every day. And those people have a purpose just like your organization. They have a purpose in your organization. And I believe they have a moral purpose in life. And they should be led with some type of passion from a leader. And I don't mean up with people every day. I don't mean, the Tony Robbins of the world, which, no slight to at all. There's some kind of passion, And I got asked, I said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, I'll give you a classic example. And if I am notorious if I run in a hall, especially when I was running a division, and I see somebody I didn't know, or they walk past the hall, right? Where I sat, when I became the special agent in charge of the Dallas Field Division, they would call that Mahogany Row. Guys would joke, well, we don't want to go up there. That's where all the bosses are. But if I saw somebody go by and I didn't know them, I would say, hey. And I say, hey, come here. And I do something like this. Where do you work? Who are you doing? This is who I am. And tell me something about yourself. Tell me something about your family. Tell me something about your and just shortly, I'm not going out to have dinner with the guy or gal. Just tell me something about yourself. And a lot of people I find weren't used to that. They weren't used to having a boss come up to them and caring about, say, hey, what's going on in your personal life? How's things? How long you been working in this section? And I would get up and kind of walk around, and people call it the walk around boss, but it's hard to do that because you're busy, man. You're busy every day, so you got to kind of find those times to say, hey, do I really believe this? And I'll tell you what, brother, one of the first things now when I go out and talk, when I open up, I start with this thing called, what's your why? Why do you do what you do? And you got guys and gals looking at you weird. Go, seriously, think about it for a minute. Why do you do? What happens is we get so consumed in our profession, in our calling, in our position, we forget our why. We forget why we came to this profession. We forget why we promoted. We forget what's important to us. And we put that off to the side and we start to become this machine, that was never designed that way. And we lose part of our heart. And so how do I bring that back and say, hey, wait a minute, these are men and women, and they have mortgages and families and all sorts of stuff. they're not just assets, and I've been guilty of this too. Say, oh, these are our greatest asset. No, these are men and women who are going to take us to our goal, who are going to take us to our mission, who are going to take us where we need to go so that we accomplish the mission. And so you have to. They're not pieces of equipment. These are human beings, and they're all going through this. Your life is throwing them curveballs all day long, just like everybody else. And so you have to be willing to share your heart and to lead from the heart.
Jimmy, there's separate from the podcast, we're having another discussion, but I want to connect you with one of my clients who I've interviewed on this show a couple times. Actually, our third interview with him is going to be coming out pretty soon. His name's Emil Studham, and he's part of an outfit called Performance by Design. He came and he used our methodology, and he really credits it for helping him, supercharge his efforts, and I'm grateful that he gives us some of that credit. But he's in the world of helping teams be high performance, right? Performance by Design, it comes from the world of professional sports in Australia. There was a fellow there who was one of the greatest Australian rules football players of all time. His name's Paul Roosy, they call him. And he was on a team that had not won the equivalent of their Super Bowl for over 70 years. And he became their coach, and he implemented this heart-based methodology with a few other things around holding people accountable and metrics and performance. And within 3 years, they won the championship. And then they won it a couple of years in a row. And then he was hired by other teams to show them how to do it. Now they're doing this corporations globally, and they found a bunch of corporate teams that are going. And that's what made me think when we first spoke that, man, I think something similar could be possible for the work that you're doing in that space. But now that you're explaining this to me, this is an idea whose time has come. Obviously, it requires leaders that see things that way and have a bit of a forward-thinking mindset. I'm not going to use the word progressive because, that's the commies have co-opted that word,
Yeah.
But
People look at you strange.
forward-thinking.
What do you mean?
But this is pretty brilliant stuff. So, what you did allowed your people to perform, and it also allowed your superiors to say, Jimmy Capra is somebody we ought to keep promoting because he's delivering, good results over here, and his people are like working hard for him. And what's the difference between, delivering performance through this philosophy and folks who frankly are a little more uncaring, just don't care, push people, and if they don't get results, move them out of the job? Why do you believe this methodology is better than that methodology? Why do you think it's being embraced in a bigger and bigger way all around the world?
Well, I think, as a part of this, lead from the heart, I tell people our pursuit is for excellence in everything we do. So if you're going to lead from the heart, right, and you're going to care about men and women, you have to pursue excellence. And this is what I would tell people all the time. Matter of fact, I would hammer that home to my crew. We pursue excellence in everything. What do I mean by that? We're not satisfied where we're at. Now there's a big difference. It's not that I'm not satisfied with my life, with my career, it's where I'm at right now. From an organizational standpoint, can we get better? And how do we get better? So it's always reaching up to the next level. How do I reach up to the next level? And it's driving men and women to be that. Listen, we pursue excellence in our professional and in our personal lives. Keep going. We're going to keep going. We want to go towards elite, if that makes sense. And how do you get there? It's not through the ego, right? It's not, because there's a lot of, I've met men and women in my life that they've got egos that can't get them into the room, and they are elite, whether they're athletes, military, special. I have a very good friend of mine who was a Navy SEAL, one of the most humble men I've ever met, and has a crew here in Dallas. I get the opportunity to hang with from time to time, and he talks about pursuing elite, but he also talks about this, do it from being humble, being, leveling a level of humility, because those people who don't understand that, they let their ego overpower them. So in the pursuit of excellence, when I think about, let me give you a quick story. So, because that's what most of my books are, telling stories that back it up. So I'm in this division for a short period. It's one of the smallest personnel-wise divisions in the country. And in the midst of the methamphetamine craze, most all of the crews. Now, I also have a team of men and women who are my staff, who are other leaders, who are amazing leaders themselves. And when I tell you, I love them, I love them. And we had most all of our groups, our teams, our tactical groups working on this huge operation, and it was successful. All the good guys went home, all the bad guys went to jail. Probably one of the biggest compliments we got as a division, this tiny little division compared to 25 other divisions across the United States, was the then chief of operations asked one of his guys, how is this team, how are they doing this? How are they able to accomplish this? And that's what was being asked at this operations meeting. How are they able to do this? And the response from one of the guys that I knew real well said, they care about each other. He said, what do you mean? He goes, I'm telling you right now, these guys care about each other. Their teams care about each other. They care about their bosses. The bosses care about them. And you can't stop them. Their pursuit is for excellence. They don't want to stop. I often ask people, I said, when's the last time as a leader you had to tell people to go home? And people look at me, what are you talking about? In the midst of that operation, we had to grab a supervisor who was running a tackle team because he was just amazing. I said, you need to go home. He said, boss, we do this. I said, you need to go home. You need to come up for air, give your guys a rest, because that you can get to a point where it can be dangerous. But more importantly, go home, get some rest, take a breath, see your family, give yourself a couple of days. Then we'll come back, we'll go back into the fight. That's the kind of thing that you do. Great work, good work, constantly building those men and women up, and not in a phony way. You know, getting those young leaders and bringing them in, say, dude, you're doing awesome. Keep it up, and keep it up. And when we had a problem, if there was an incident, we talk about it. Sit down. Let's figure out what we did. What did we do wrong? What did we do right? Okay, let's move on. Oh, good. Let's get back in the fight. And that's part of it, man. And again, let me go back. It doesn't mean we're not holding people accountable. You know what I mean? I would tell my people, hey, you're accountable to me, and I'm accountable to you. So let's keep going. And you don't. The key is to develop trust with these men and women, and the only way you can do that is you got to have a relationship. And that's the thing I find that bosses, leaders in some organizations don't want to do. They say, oh, well, I've heard this so many times. Well, familiarity breeds contempt. Well, if you let it, I keep my people. I had another senior executive years ago said, hey, you're going to find out that you need to keep people at a distance and off balance. And I'm like, what? This is what I'm thinking in my head. I said, what do you mean off? I said, if you keep people at a distance, you'll never get to know them. If you never get to know them, you can't develop a relationship. If you don't develop a relationship, you're not going to develop trust. And what is the morale going to look like? What's it going to look like? And so you get that nonsense. You get that. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? I was overseas speaking to our crew years ago in Rome, and so one of the guys I was speaking to is mid-level manager, real. I got to watch my language. He's a real smart guy, And I was caring about people up, and he goes, hey, don't you have 10,000 people under you? I said, yeah, because my key was to men and women in leadership positions, no matter where they are, get to know your people, get to know them. You want to make a difference, get to know them. Some people don't want you to know them, but get to know them, break through, get to know them. And this is what he said. He says to me, he goes, do you know all 10,000 people? Now, the bad guy in me wanted to come out and smack him upside his head, but we don't like that. We don't do things like that. So I said, no. I said, I don't know all 10,000. And he's just being a smart aleck.
Yeah, he was.
Thought he was going to make a point.
I would have used a different phrase, but smart would have been part of it.
Yeah. So I said, no, I don't. I said, but my staff, I know my staff. I know the men that they know. And I tried to drive that all the way down. And then I looked at him and said, what's your janitor's name? He said, what? Because he had a relatively good sized office as a mid-level manager. I said, what's your janitor's name in your office? He just looked at me. I said, what's your security guard's name? I don't know. I said, you don't know anybody then. They're part of your team. That's part of your team. This is what I'm talking about. Yeah, you know your staff and your secretary. You don't know your janitor, and you don't know the janitor that's cleared to come into your office to clean your office. You don't know them. You want to know? You know what my janitor is? His name is Rodolfo. He comes from Central America. He's got a wife and 2 kids. He's working 2 jobs, blah, blah, but he's on our team. This is what I mean. It's not just those, it's not just in the, I've never been in sales. but it's if I'm an organization that sells things, it's not just the salesman. It's the entire organization. It's not just the guys who are I'm the salesman. I win. It's the secretary who's moving stuff. It's that professional clerical person that's making things work. It's the janitor that's cleaning the office. People say, really, you're gonna yes, really. Yes, really. And the next thing you know, things start to galvanize. People start to feel, man, this is what teams are made out of. But it doesn't mean you don't have issues. It doesn't mean people don't have problems. It doesn't mean some people won't get it. They won't buy into it. That's okay. That's never stopped me.
Yeah, that's really good. I'm gonna push back on one thing you said, because I like everything you said, but you said I've never been in sales. Yes, you have. You've been selling this vision forever and ever and ever. You maybe haven't collected cash for what you've sold, but you've been in sales.
I know. Actually, I got a good friend of mine who we lost a few years ago used to say the same thing. He actually tried to get me. I said, I'm not a good salesman. He goes, are you kidding me? Because I was speaking.
You're one of the best salespeople on earth. What are you talking about?
Said, come on, man. But of course, I don't. You don't think that. But I understand what you're saying. But that's what I mean.
Who's the greatest salesman in history?
Yeah.
Who is it? Tell me.
No, the greatest salesman in history. Other than my God.
Jesus Christ is the greatest salesman in history. He took a philosophy from a poor corner of the world, and over 2 billion people in the world bought it.
Yeah,
it's the greatest salesman in history.
Here's the thing, and here's what did he say? What's the greatest thing? Is to love your neighbor. And people hear that,
love one
and they go, he said, love one another, love your neighbor, pray for your enemy, do this, that, and the other thing. That like doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound right. And in my presentations, I weave my faith in there. Just I'm not trying to proselytize. I just kind of tell people where I stand. I said one of the greatest, I think, examples of what it takes to love people. Right? I said it's hard to love somebody who completely thinks different than you, doesn't have the same faith, the beliefs, the political standings, and everything else. I always used a Good Samaritan. They go, what do you mean? Oh yeah, the Good Samaritan is about a guy who did something good for another guy. Because now you don't understand when the rabbi's talking about that story, he says this guy is on his way somewhere, who's probably a Jewish guy. He gets beat up and left. The next guy that comes along, the rabbi says, the next guy that comes along is a Levite. He's a priest. He looks and he literally walks on the other side of the road to get away from him. The next guy that comes by is the Levite's assistant, and he walks. But then a Samaritan came along and looked, and he said, had compassion, bandaged him up. I always use this. I said, goes to a Motel 6, drops him off, gives him a couple of bucks, says, I'll be back here a couple of weeks. I'll give you the rest of the money if you need to. If you need more money to take care of him, I'll do that. People said, yes, it's about it's about somebody having compassion on somebody. It's so much more than that, because the Samaritan Jews hated each other. They would literally go around each other's community, not to walk through, not to have contact with them. But in this case, he looked and he had compassion on them. That is what it takes to love somebody. It's put all that stuff off to the side and say, I need to help this person. I need to go out of the way to help this person. But by the way, he doesn't look like me. He doesn't believe like me. He doesn't walk my walk. But in that time of need, I need to step out and help that person. And that's what I said. That's really kind of encapsulate that whole what it takes to love somebody. And it's hard for people to get that, brother. It's sometimes it's challenging. I had a CEO years ago who said, you don't understand. He goes, you don't understand. The bottom line is money. The bottom line is quarterlies. The bottom line is what's on one side of the book, on the other side of the book. I said, dude, you don't understand. The way to get there is your men and women who will take you there if you lead them well, if you care about them. They'll take you, they'll meet your goals, they'll meet you. But if your first concern in your organization is just, we need to make money, that's what we're all about. I said, yeah, you may make some money, but you won't develop people. You'll never develop men and women. You won't develop them personally, because your underlying motive is, we're going to make money no matter what. That's just bad juju, man. That's what it's kind of. It's kind of the whole gig pay for performance. Everybody was jumping on the bandwagon, and they found out as the pay for performance thing, people lie, cheat, and everything else to get to the market.
Performance numbers. They need to, for sure, man. It's game in the system.
Yeah, exactly. Instead of develop people, build them up, say, man, we can, this is where we need to go to identify those men and women who are really on the tip of the spear, I would call it. Let's go. And to get them, right, to get them into that idea that pushes it down, to develop them into the kinds of leaders that they want to become. You're not looking for clones. I tell people all the time, I'm not looking for a clone. I'm looking for men and women who, from the heart, want to do this, who really care about men and women. But you pay a price, man. You because people let you down. You pay a price because not everybody gets it. Listen, I've been in more than one meeting where after talking, I get animated, I get excited. You can tell the guy or the gal out there who's not buying it. I don't buy it. I can't do anything about that. I can't. I can only share with you what I know that it works, and it works for sure. It's not a magic potion. It's not a 1, 2, 3. It's a matter of, are you going to decide to do this? Are you going to decide to care about people?
So when you bring this philosophy into the organization, do you have some sort of like metrics or best performance kind of practices that you bring to people to help them imbue what they do day to day with this? Because it's easy to say this. It's a heck of a lot harder to make sure it gets driven through your organization without some kind of way to do it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So I have in my first book, I think there's 11 chapters. Somebody asked me, hey, how come you only had 11 chapters? I said, I didn't have anything else to say. That's it. 11 chapters. I don't have anything. And I call it a plane ride book. You can read it 1, 2, 3, but each chapter is kind of laid out in a certain way. Before I talk to guys about what their why is. But as far as sitting down and measuring stuff, so while I was on the job, we had this, we developed this kind of workflow type of thing to take a look at quarterly where people are at. But it's hard. It's hard to measure morale. And I would ask somebody, when somebody says, well, Jimmy, how can I do it? How do I measure morale? I said, how long does it take you to get something done in your space? I go, what do you mean? I'm just asking. How long does it take something to get done? Whether it's, I need to buy a bucket of wax, I need to make this happen. I'm not only build a building or something else. Like when you want to, how long does it take? So the whole thing with leading from the heart is there was it's the whole notion is to develop trust within your organization and to build these relationships, and that trust is lasting. Now there was a number of studies. The Wyatt Watson study is probably the most famous, that developed a study that said it compared companies in the same market, the same backgrounds, the companies that had high trust versus companies that had low trust. Companies that had high trust, there's two tangible things. High trust companies, it cost them less and their speed was more. So they did things faster with less money. Companies with low trust was just the opposite. They started measuring some of these things because those things are hard to. So they looked at those things and started asking people, how are you able to get this done? And when people start saying, hey, people care about each other. So there's no, hey, I'm going to put this, let me give you and this is my fault. This is my problem. And it always has been. So when I talk to people, I walk them down my walk and the reality of things, because we only have, if you said, well, Jimmy, why is all this so important? We only have X amount of breaths. Probably the best staff that I've ever had. I think every one of those men and women realized I'm only here temporarily. And what am I doing in the time that the good Lord's given me? I'm here temporarily. And that should move you to a point, not only just at work, but with your family. Because I constantly talk to men and women about not just at work, and I'd always weave in, what's your why at your home? What's happening there? Because we've watched in our society and our culture, we've lost this disintegration of family. We've lost this disintegration of taking care of our children. And you can't have both things. You can't be this superstar at work and neglect the things at home. And I just tell people, you can't be that guy or that gal. If you are, you're missing it. You're missing it. For what? For what? You wake up someday and you're at the highest peak and you retire, they give you a gold watch and you've left the wake of destruction personally behind you. What good is that? And so where are you from a work life balance? I talk about those things, and you walk that. You make sure you walk that walk. Here, for instance, I never bought into the whole open door thing. Yeah, I'm a former military guy. I have an open door policy. You can't just waltz into my office and sit down and talk. And I can ask your boss and everything. I'm going to go make an appointment. More than happy to. But I don't buy this. Hey, how you doing? Just walk in anytime. No, we have a chain of command. We have organizational discipline. This is what we're part of. So we don't separate it. We're not a club. We're not a fraternity because you care about people. As a matter of fact, what I found is our people become sharper. They become more disciplined organizationally when we develop those trust relationships, when we develop that kind of stuff where people care about each other, become sharper. They become more focused on what they want to do. It doesn't sound like that would be, because some people say, well, you sound like it's a big frat. It ain't a big frat, man. And in my walk, you can't afford to be a frat. Somebody get killed. You got to make sure men and women are on the tip of the spear. They're trained up. They're competent in their, they're more than just on time. They're what my buddy talks about is they're pursuing, not only pursuing excellence, but they're pursuing the elite in them. And they want to share that. They want the men and women to their left and right. They want to be elite. They want to pursue excellence together. So we accomplish the mission. And so it's not this whole lovey-dovey thing. So get back to your original question, it's kind of metrics and everything. I don't know what that looks like from I've read some things, I've saw the boxes and everything else like that. The thing is, it's a shared idea of learning how to trust people. And then listen, if you're going to be that guy, you got to be willing to grab somebody by the collar and say, come on in here, let me talk to you. I had a young man, his crew loved him. His crew absolutely loved him. Young supervisor. His problem is, outside his crew, he loved his crew so much. When he went to go talk to other people about situation, he was like a bull in a china shop. So he came into my office one day. I said, hey, I want to talk to you. And I got up. I said, what would you do if I got up and I pushed you? And now he's looking at me. Now at the time, I'm the special agent in charge. And he's a field supervisor. So he's about 4 levels lower than me. But that's to give you an idea where he's at. It's like he really went to the principal's office. You know what I mean? But love the guy. Great supervisor, sharp agent and everything. And I looked at him. I said, what would you do if I pushed you? So he just looked, and he didn't know where I was coming from. I said, I'm going to ask you again, where would you go? What would you do if I was going to push you? So again, he said, I don't know. So I got up behind my desk. I walked around to the side, and his eyes got this big. And I said, what would you do if I'm going to push you? And he said, I guess I push you back. I said, that's what you do when you go into meetings. You're the first guy to push somebody. You gotta learn how to keep this quiet, listen, relax. And he was like, well, I'm not going to let anybody roll over. I get that. But don't be the guy. So you know what I mean? You can't just say I'm lead from the heart and not be willing to pour into people. I make it sound, I say it's like a pitcher. What are you pouring into people? And it's constant. You're constantly doing that. And it's a funny thing when you're doing that, you're learning. You're realizing, hey, I'm not so good at this. I'm not so good at that. And you're constantly learning. I said, you're constantly pouring into things. But here's the thing, brother. So I don't want people to think, oh, this has got some kind of magic and everybody's going to be great. No, sometimes you pour into somebody and next thing you hear something that's leaking out of their backside. No matter how much you pour into them, it's leaking out of their backside. It says, what do you do? Says, I got to ask this, Jim, what do you do? There's been a few people in my walk that I've realized are not interested in growing personally or professionally. They're not. So to say everybody who gets this leading from the heart thing, it's going to be great. No, it's there's been a few people. And then what happens is I go, okay. I basically said, then I don't have any more interaction with them. People said, well, I thought, no, I don't hate them. But I'm not going to waste time pouring into them because there's all these other men and women who want to be poured into. And that happened to me with an agent out there, and I was explaining something, and when I walked out of the office, he said something stupid to the rest of the crew. I found out about it, and I grabbed his boss, and I said, I will never pour another drop into this guy. Now, that sounds hard, it sounds cruel. Way what happened to love, and I still love the guy, want him to do well, but I don't have time to pour into somebody who's just going to leak out of his backside. You gotta be like that. You're running an organization. You're driving it. What happens if he changes? If he changes, that's great. I'm still going to say hello. How are you? How's your family? But there are times in my position that I have the opportunity, even for 5 minutes, to talk to some young men or women about, hey, where are you going? Where's your drive? What's your why? Why do you believe what you believe? This guy, I'm not doing it anymore. I can't. You're in a way. You don't buy into it, and it's okay. It's okay. It's not like I shunned him and I pretend he doesn't exist. But like I said, these are things that you just got to be prepared for. Because the first time you run into somebody like that, I got to be honest with you. I remember the first time as a young supervisor, I run into somebody like that. I was like shocked. I said, how can this be? How can this person not like being here? What do you mean? I was shocked. And then in your mind, you're thinking, I can change this person. I'm here to fix them. We're not here to fix anybody when you're in leadership position. You don't fix anybody. You can't put something in someone that wasn't there in the first place. Well, you know what I mean? You can't. So my job is not to fix them. My job is, here's my expectations. This is what I expect of you. Here's what you can expect of me. Come on, let's go. We got a mission to do. Let's rock and roll. That's the kind of stuff.
Jimmy, this has been a great conversation. On this show, we're definitely going to have you back.
I'm sorry, man. I get all animated and stuff because listen. I believe in this so heartily, and a lot of it has to do with my faith. If I would be lying to say otherwise, and I go back to, brother, we only have X amount of breaths.
Yeah.
Honest to goodness. I think when you realize that, when you say, okay, there's a good piece of scripture that I remember that says, Lord, teach me to number my days. In other words, be mindful of how much time you do. We don't know. We don't know, man. Don't know how much time we have. So in the time that I have, what difference am I making? It goes back to, what's your why? Why do you do what you do? If I sit with you, I bet you do. Nikki, why do you do what you do? Why do you believe the way you believe? And then that forces us to go. And I've had guys walk up to me and go, I've never really considered that. I do this thing. What happens is we do our thing. We pursue our profession, but we forget our why. We forget. And there's a couple of books on that and everything. But I've said we forget our why. When I was young, I'm sorry, I get excited. I'm salivating. When I was a man, I couldn't wait. When I first got hired by a police department, I would stand in front of the mirror with my hat, my badge. I had what they call a Sam Brown on, and I was like, I'm going to be like Captain America. When I got my badge to become a special agent, I stood there looking at my badge and goes, man, we're gonna fix the world. That drive, that passion to do that. But what happens is as we move up the ranks, or as time goes by, as we're scarred, from life or from our profession, we forget our why. And if you forget your why, you start becoming a drone that goes into work every day. You start you forget about, pouring into people. Things at home start to get difficult. And so you got to remember, hey, remember my why. Remember why I do this. Remember why I pour into you, why it's important to develop relationships. And this is always the challenge. And being in a public service career, I would start to talk to people somewhere in those meetings about in their professional life, but in their personal life. I would say, listen, your career and your at the vest, they should literally look like a piece of rope, two pieces tied together. They shouldn't, one goes one way, one goes the other way. It shouldn't be like that. I said, we spend more time with each other in this profession than sometimes we do in our own family. And we have to remember that. There's time to come up for air and say, hey, you know what? I need to take some time. I need to refresh. I need to not lose my family. And I would tell people all the time, that you're in pursuit of your profession. You didn't sign on to this to lose your faith, to lose your wife, your children, to lose your hobbies. So I would say people often talk about work-life balance. I got to be honest with you, Nikki, I don't know what that means, because I've always been a guy that pursues excellence. I've trained up my children. You sacrifice now for the prize at the end. In other words, when they were in school, you want to get there. What do you want to do? I was fortunate. Three of my sons went to military academies. And when they were younger, I remember the first one who came up to me and said, hey, Dad, I think I really want to go to this academy. I said, okay, son, here's what you got to do. You got to sacrifice now. That means you got to study. You got to take time. You can't be like everybody else. If that's where your goal is, you have to pursue that excellence. You're pursuing elite. And so that's what it's going to require. And I was fortunate. All my kids went to college. They've all five of them are married to individuals that are equally yoked spouses who believe the same way. And if somebody says, "What's your greatest accomplishment besides marrying my wife, who's the brains of this outfit?" It would be when I look at my children and how proud I am. Now they've all had challenges. I mean, all of them. My so what I'm talking about from leading from the heart. Where's your front line? What people would say, the front line is where the rubber meets the road. The front line is where we pursue the mission, but the front line is also where you live your life at home. You can't lose sight of that. You just can't. We got to recognize that. Let me just give you this. I know I'm throwing a lot. A few years ago, and I always talk about work-life balance. A few years ago, the pursuing speaking gigs and everything just seemed to stop. Um, I had written a couple of books and everything. A couple of kids were moving away, who was getting married and everything else like that. And I got a pretty serious a diagnosis, a medical I'm fine now. I'm not fine, but so I'm sitting in church thinking to myself, I am so out of whack. I'm so imbalanced. I feel like I'm being pulled in 1,000 different directions, and I'm just sitting there going, man, I am. When you talk about work-life balance, I am like broken. And my pastor, who I love dearly, started talking about it. Just was one of those things. I call it a God thing. He talks about the rhythm and the seasons, rhythm of your life and the seasons. And I immediately came home. You ever hear something, Nick, and you wrap your arms around it and say, "There's something there. There's something there." And I raced home and I looked up everything about rhythms and seasons. And I was telling people stuff, not realizing sometimes what you're saying is we all have these seasons in our life. We all have these seasons in our professional life and our personal life. And there's a rhythm to that we have to understand. I would tell people it's more, I said, I don't know if we can ever pursue work-life balance, but you got to recognize what the season that you're in and where your rhythm is. And rhythm in terms of rhythm is timing. I said, in other words, if you ever hear, and this is how I felt at the time, you ever hear an orchestra warming up? It is this cacophony of sound. It's just, oh my, it's horrible. And that's how I felt until the conductor goes tap, tap with his little stick, whatever they call it, tap, tap, tap.
Yeah, yeah,
And they
yeah.
start. And I said, you realize, hey man, we're the conductor. Tap. What's our rhythm going to be? Hey, what becomes important? Let's get back to our priorities here. Where am I at? What in this season that I'm in becomes my priority? And you grab a hold of that saying, I got it. Okay. I got it. In this season, this is where I need to be. And when you talk about rhythm, we're not always banging on the drums. There's the percussion, there's this. And that's how I started thinking about things. That's what I'm talking about, work-life balance. Because you don't want somebody coming in and say, hey, and I talk about this. Hey, it's 3 o'clock on a Friday. I'm leaving. You said work-life balance. I'm going home to my family. So, well, wait a minute. We got another operation to do. Nope, you said work-life balance. That's not what I'm talking about. Is being mindful in pursuit of excellence where you are. Being mindful about your priorities in that season that you're in. It's critical that you do that. Because my wife will tell you, my kids will too. There was, in the height of my time on the street as an agent, I wasn't home a lot at all. I mean, I lived sometimes out in the street. There's sometimes before cell phones and everything else, I would call my wife and said, I'm jumping on a plane. I said, I'll call you when I can. Boom. And I'd be gone for 2 or 3 days. And you have to be mindful. Now I will tell you, I married an amazing, amazing woman who's done nothing but support me. And I know that's special. I understand that.
It is.
But also
In this
shared
day
with
and
her.
age, it's ridiculously special.
Yeah, no, man, brother, I get it. So you can't, like I said, you cannot pursue excellence in work and neglect excellence at home. You can't, even though we know stuff happens. I mean, the numbers out there, and I've written about the numbers out there for divorce and everything else are pretty high. But if you're mindful of those things, if you're mindful of just not the relationships at work, but you're mindful of your relationships at home, you're mindful of the season that you're in and the rhythm that you're in, you realize your priorities and where am I at? Where should I be? So that, it's pretty cool stuff.
No, it's awesome. So Jimmy, this has been a great conversation. Like I said, I think we ought to have you back on this show. I know you're coming on my other show as well to go deeper into some of these subjects. But if someone's looking to get a hold of you or buy your books or check out your work, what's the best way?
Yeah, so I have a website like so many people do. It's kind of a really simple website. It's frontlineleadershipgroup.com. You can also call it my name, Jimmy Capra or James L. Capra, if you're just searching on the web, and it should take you to, or you can see the websites or the books along there. But the website will give you an idea of what we're talking about. It also tell you how to get a hold of me for speaking engagements and things like that, which I really love to do. And we're starting to, post-COVID world, as you well aware of, we're just now starting to, pick up again. And because I love doing it. Somebody says, "What, if you could wave a wand, Jim, what would you do?" I said, "I'd speak about 3 times, 4 times a month." That's a lot, as you well know. That's a lot of speaking, but I just love sharing this, so that's what we're trying to do, trying to get out there and share with people. Like I said, no magic. I don't have magic, but I have an idea, a philosophy that's important, and it changes you if you're willing to, if you're willing to be that kind of person that says, "I'm going to care about people and I'm going to love people." It's not a quiver in your liver, but it's a walk, and you're constantly learning. You're constantly learning. So it's good
That's
stuff.
awesome.
So yeah, frontlineleadershipgroup.com. Jimmy Capra. If you put in Google, it'll find the books and it'll find the website. It's a little leadership company here, and most of my stuff is just talking to people. And then we did a book together. In the midst of this, my middle son, who was a police officer, is now a federal agent, and came up to me and said, "Dad, what's wrong with my generation?" And so I sat down with my wife, and we wrote a book together called "Raising Courageous Children in a Cowardly Culture," and we talked about our walk. Well, it's not a how-to book. That's the first thing my wife said. We're not going to tell people how to raise now. It's just our story of, with 6 kids moving all over the country, me not being home a lot, and what it took. It's both the good, the bad, and the ugly, about raising kids in a culture that really is antithetical about everything about Christianity, that hates the family unit, the traditional family unit, the traditional moral values. And so we wrote this book, which was fun to do, and wrote about some of my kids who gave us permission to write about them. And it was really a lot of fun. So you can find that on there as well.
I think that's a great book. I'm looking forward to reading it myself. We'll make sure we put all of that in the show notes, Jimmy, and it'll be something I think a lot of people are going to be interested in. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
So listen, we like to end off each episode by asking you, as our guest expert, for what we call your top 3 expert action steps. These are kind of like bullet point, your best pieces of advice for people to take on in their own life, in their own business sphere, to take it to the next level. So what say you?
So the first thing I would tell somebody, and this is going to sound corny, I always tell them, "Hey, let's stop for a minute. What's your why? Why do you do what you do? Why do you do what you do at work in your profession? Why?" In other words, get in touch with, "Hey, why did you step into this?" And it's funny. I've talked to people who said, "I never intended to do this." I said, "Okay, now what? Now what? Why do you do?" So that's number one. And then this next thing is, I tell people, don't be afraid. Don't let fear steer. Don't be afraid to establish relationships with men and women at work. Don't be fearful, because we are. What happens is we have this sixth sense, man, that, well, if I do that, just throw that away, man. Don't be fearful to talk to people. Don't be fearful. Don't let fear steer. But start slow. It's not overnight. Start with just, "Hey, how you doing?" We used to have team meetings. Team meetings are just not all about team meetings. Sometimes you just about how are people doing, and be aware that men and women are dealing with things every single day. That every single day they're dealing with issues. Let me leave you with the third, which why it's so important. When I got ready to retire, you asked me earlier about metrics. When I got ready to retire, the message went out that I was retiring. I got flooded with emails. I have a box of them somewhere. There wasn't a single email that I got that said, hey, because of you, I became the greatest agent on the face of the earth. This is how most emails started. They started with, hey, boss, I don't know if you remember, but when my wife had a baby, you called and said, boom, 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 boom. Hey, boss, I don't know if you remember, but when my husband was diagnosed with cancer, you called, boom, 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 boom. Hey, boss, I don't know if you remember, but when my son was in the hospital, you, boom, boom, boom. That's what I'm talking about. Those are the kinds of emails that I got. Those are the kinds of things when I sat back and I did, and I asked the Lord, I said, I hope I've made an impact. I hope in some way that I've done what I'm supposed to be done for your eyes. I hope I made an impact. And then I start getting these things, and you realize caring about people makes a big difference. Caring about people. All these emails that I got, brother, about they were more personal than anything else. These are men and women that I worked alongside of that said, yeah, that wasn't about, hey, look how much money we seized, look how much dope we got. It was like, thank you for caring about me. Thank you for caring about my family. There were times, brother, all I could do sometimes in the place is hug on to somebody and cry with them because of a tragic incident. And not just shootings on the street. I mean, life stuff. Life stuff. You only have so many breaths. Don't be afraid to have relationships with people and pursue excellence in everything you do. Don't keep reaching up, man. Pursue excellence. And along with that, like a buddy of mine taught me, he says, pursue being elite. You can't do it without pursuing excellence.
That's awesome. I love it. I love it. These are really 3 great expert action steps. I love them. I think they're fantastic. So, listener, Jimmy Capra is the real deal. Former chief of global operations at the DEA, a man who is a warrior of love, who talks about putting love at the center of how you lead an organization. And there's a lot you can learn from him in terms of how to build thought leadership. And I think this has been exciting if you're listening to this carefully, listener, because what Jimmy's been able to do for people really is show them how to develop thought leadership through lived experience. It is your lived experience that allows you to develop the ideas that can make a difference and be brought out there in a way that's commercial and can make you money as a thought leader who has a wonderful, beautiful practice of their own. And I think that the kinds of things that Jimmy's done over here, listener, are very powerful in that regard, because what he learned at work is what he's brought to a practice right now, speaking, writing books, and it's quite fulfilling for him. So your life, listener, is about your lived experience, and it's your lived experience that's going to allow you to take things from it that you can bring forward in the form of thought leadership that can actually be a speech, it can be a training program, it can be a coaching program, it can be a 3-day retreat that you do for people, a workshop. All of these things come from lived experience. And I think what's awesome about Jimmy's story is that he's done all of this stuff, listener, and built it into a wonderful business post his retirement from the highest levels of the DEA. So take advantage of this, learn from this, take a lot of good notes. It's a very, very powerful episode. And Jimmy, so listen, man, thanks so much for being on the show, brother. I learned a ton from this. God bless you. This has been really, really good.
Thank you, man. Thanks for having me, brother. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. And that wraps up another exciting episode of the podcast, The Thought Leader Revolution. To find out more about today's guest, the one and only Jimmy Capra, go to the show notes at thethoughtleaderrevolution.com or wherever you happen to listen to this episode, be it iTunes, Stitcher, Audible, Google Play, and all the other gazillion places that are podcast platforms these days. Until next time, goodbye.
This episode has been brought to you by eCircleAcademy.com, the proven system to add 6 to 7 figures a year to your thought leader practice.